configuration. So that's some of the things that we thought about.
As far as students per classroom, has that changed at all?
What's that?
The number of students per classroom, has that changed at all? Or?
The number of students that would be accessible in each of those, in the classrooms, whether it was a remodel or the new, is basically the same configuration. The slight difference is that Steve has mentioned that, you know, desks are supposed to have 2 feet of space in between them. In our rooms that were built in '96, I have about 1.5 feet at most in between my desk rows. So that would be, you know, that would solve that issue in the new, just for more flow of students and things of that nature. And the other part that it'll do for us as a staff is it'll give us the ability to collaborate. Right now, in order to collaborate, we got to walk across the building versus when we're in the hallway watching our students in between passing time, we can talk real quick about what went well with the lesson that somebody's going to be teaching later that day. Just have a better communication and flow as well.
One of the things that if we would go with the other remodel is the configuration of room 608. We have pods going in there, but they're not like in one area of the room. I don't know if you have that slide available, Brady or Dr. Schultz, to show that other one, but there's basically 7 lab stations in one area, and then there's one that's by a door. And it's just really an odd configuration. It was the best we could do with that room, though.
Right.
With the size of the room.
Yeah.
It does increase the square footage of all the classrooms, and one of the things that we have heard over and over was the setup, and not having to set up and take down and set up and take down, and to be able to do some of those higher level labs that you talked about, Matt. I know that Lori had talked a little bit too about being closer to the greenhouse and an opportunity to collaborate with the biology class with the greenhouse as well.
Steve, why did we go with a remodel instead of the direction of an addition when we moved forward with the last 2 referendums, knowing the amount of space we pick up and knowing the cost associated with the additions we were looking at in the industrial arts area, maybe additions elsewhere? I guess if I hear a lot about safety, I understand the importance of safety, but why didn't we look to address that during the last 2 referendums?
I think in the last 2 referendums, we were looking at whatever we could to try and minimize the very minimalistic without taking it the next step. And this is really the next step. So let's say the referendum would have passed.
And this space, remember, Steve, we had not got to the point in our last referendum, we had not gotten to the point of saying what we were going to do with the square footage. But in our minds, we had started to talk. I remember our last referendum was just the square footage. So in our minds, what we had talked about is having science in all one area. These classrooms here, we're going to move over to where the current locker rooms were. So we were able to take these classrooms and move them over to the locker room area. Those could have become science classrooms. We hadn't quite got to that point of deciding what was going to happen with our square footage. But we all along had thought about putting our science classrooms together and trying to add a little bit of that additional space. We would have picked up classrooms in the referendum. So we did not need to do just 5 additional classrooms over here because we would have picked those up in where those locker room areas are. Those would have become almost five classrooms.
That's kind of the next variable when a referendum passes. You roll your sleeves up and you start getting into the...
What does that square footage look like?
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah,
I
the detail
challenged
of
you
it.
guys about that.
Yeah.
You know, the first thing is that, guys, thanks for stepping up and providing solutions. Quite honestly, that's the first thing that we've been talking about. We need solutions to come to us so we can help make positive changes. So that's the first thing, regardless of whatever happens. Don't be discouraged, and we appreciate the engagement and involvement. I am going to challenge some things, and I want to know, because the same questions happen in the community, and they deserve an explanation as well. You do a really good job of identifying option B, student learning benefits. I do not see a slide for option B. What is the curriculum difference in offering between option A and option B? Is there deliverables that are different between the options and what the student will learn?
As I understand it, they were presenting.
I can say for the bigger picture of the domino effect, that our kids are going to have more opportunities if you go to the slide with the English classroom, now Mr. McCulloch would have his own classroom where he can have his lessons in his own room. And we can get our kids back in the building, I guess, so that's going to help when you look at the domino effect. But I can't speak for the science department. The only thing with the science department is collaborating with it, working together. When I was a teacher in Fond du Lac, it was great to have my CTE people across the hallway where at the end of the hour, we're standing there saying, hey, how'd the lesson go? Any challenges with it? What do you think I should do this next hour when I teach in the same class? You now have that opportunity because you're all in that one area. So that would benefit the students in
And there's
general.
no doubt, there's a huge difference with Steve Promotion would take his classroom, and that would move to the classroom right next door to his. So we could now have that. That will absolutely impact the student learning in our CTE area.
The projects he can do now, because he'll have more space, is definitely going to help Mr. Commotion's class.
I guess the one piece to maybe put a cap on that idea is traditionally high schools try to run their subject areas together. That's what you're hearing on this. Right now, we do not have that in any way, shape, or form. We've got a math class running in the special ed wing. We've got an English teacher on a cart. We've got a social studies teacher who's literally in the CTE wing. So all of those things are solved. With an addition, you're moving that social studies teacher back to a grouping with them. You're moving the math teacher back to a grouping with them. You're taking the English teacher who travels and putting them with the other English teachers, and you're also accomplishing all of the science teachers together. It's difficult to quantify the benefit of working with your colleagues and to sit here and tell you a specific, a written down benefit, but I can tell you, having been in schools that have that just ingrained in their building, it's a significant difference. It's a significant benefit to have that. Really, we don't have that in any department right now, really.
Gotcha. One thing for us, Kevin, too, or there's a couple, I think, is that if we're all together, the transportation of equipment lessens. So therefore, the wear and tear on that equipment of transportation, things get jostled, electrical components can come unplugged, things of that nature. Then we lose instructional time troubleshooting those, fixing those, or spending our budget materials on replacing them versus looking at finding newer, better things that we can do with our students to become more engaging, more hands-on, more critical thinking than what we're currently doing. So that's, for me, that's a huge benefit with everything being clustered together.
Another benefit that I would see is that sometimes Matt might be doing a demonstration in AP Chem that I'm not going to be doing in my earth science class, but it's something very beneficial for the students to see. If he's across the hall, I can bring my students over there to see the demo, but when he's in a whole different part of the school, I can't walk my kids all the way down there. That would be wasting time.
Gotcha. The one thing also, an observation, the forethought of the trickle down on other needs and how to solve them, that was I'm real impressed by your team, quite honestly. That draws a question though, how far down our list of needs does this take us? And are we going to be able to chew, quite honestly, this without any other significant expenses next year, 2, 3, going forward? Quite honestly, I pounded hard on it. What is the plan for those, and what are the budgets? In the private world, it's called a CapEx spending plan. And we don't know right now if there's going to be something behind this in 6 months. We don't know. So it's really tough to make such a critical decision, quite honestly, based off of having some uncertainties of other needs thereafter. That becomes a challenge.
Maybe that's a good point to discuss the financing component of this. I know Brent has some information on the board on how this will be financed. Either project on zero impact to our taxpayers. Unless there's further discussion, we can always come back to it because this is really, we need to understand what the plan looks like, and then we also need to understand the cost. Obviously, we would love to have the greatest science wing in the world, but there's a cost component too that we need to understand as a board. So
the only question I have for Steve, in the option B, to get those other rooms ready for Mr. Promotion's room, is that all included in that cost? Not like suppose we, missing, all of a sudden we have another $1 million to get these rooms ready. I mean, that's another,
The costs that are in there that were generated were for the new construction and the remodeling of the science areas that are hashed in grade
okay.
and nothing else. Now, I will say it includes FF&E, fees and so forth as a part of that, but it kind of depends on what you want to do for those areas, whether you do it on day one or day two or year two or
They're
year
like
three.
white boxes up.
Yeah, it sets it up, so for instance, the social studies classroom in Tech Ed, on day one, those social studies moves out, they leave their classroom intact, no problem. Metals comes in and uses that classroom just like any other classroom. It's really not a cost impact, and he gets his space back for free. On something like Brady's area where the IT is currently, when he vacates that area, it generally becomes an open area that can be used for band room storage and so forth in the interim. Long-term, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however you guys want to budget that, to redo that room in its entirety, I would address that as part of the band room itself, because your band room at some point is going to need to be remodeled. It is in really rough shape. So it just, as Nate had said, it gives you the domino effect. It allows you to then look at and grab those projects off one at a time. So, you know, if that helps answer that question, is there anything budgeted other than what's in the project right now? It's the gray areas, it's the yellow areas, and as Ann said, it's basically a white box for what you have.
It gets it ready for that next opportunity. And the other thing really that it does is it gets those spaces ready to be able to be utilized. So the remodel does come as part of it. So we would remodel those areas. I mean, we would white box those areas and get those ready to be able to use. It addresses quite a few issues for us.
Financing?
Sure. So to finance, what do the dollars look like for this project, and how do you finance a project like this? Well, we've been meeting since July and August, September, October. We have been meeting for many months to discuss how would we finance this issue. So we asked for some support from our financial advisor, from Ellers, who's going to come up and share with us solutions on how to finance the options that you have in front of you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Again, I'm Jeff Seeley. Thank you for having me. We want to talk a little bit about some financing options for either one of the projects. And to begin with, some discussions started a few months back, and there was some discussion about what options are available, and obviously without a vote at this point and with minimal tax impact. So obviously there's one option. You could actually take money out of your fund reserves, your fund balance, and pay for some of these projects. That creates a couple situations for you that are not positive situations. First, it puts you in a situation, especially if you're dealing with a larger project, $4 million, it puts you in a situation where you're spending your reserves. And you will most likely, I know Brent looked at this, have to deal with cash flow borrowing. So that means issuing tax and revenue anticipation notes on an annual basis for maybe a couple $1 million or so. Now, right now, interest rates are really low, so borrowing funds on a cash flow basis, obviously the interest is going to add up each and every year, but you know, looking out 5 years from now, if you're still cash flow borrowing because of the decision, interest rates may be quite a bit higher. That money comes out of your general operating budget. It competes with the money that you're using for your instruction. The other thing to keep in mind is you still have the permanent financing to put in place on the energy project, $13 million. So you have that temporary note, you have to refund that. Now, if you, one of the things that the rating agency will do is they will watch your fund balance and your decisions on how to use fund balance. And that is going to be a major red flag, especially with a larger project. The smaller project's a little harder to predict, but with the larger project, if you use the operating funds, then you are very, very likely to drop in a rating. And that could cost you significant dollars on the 13 million and any other future borrowing, because it's going to take you a while. It's not easy to rebuild the fund balance. So if you get into the cash flow, that's a major red flag. You're spending the fund balance, that's a major red flag. So we looked at some other options, and of course, you just went through an energy project, so you know you can issue bonds without going to vote. You can issue bonds for an addition or a renovation the same way. However, you don't get taxing authority for it. So you don't, unlike the energy project, you don't have the authority to go and tax for that revenue source. So you could set up, say, a 10-year bond for the $1.2 million project. You could set up a 20-year bond for the $4.2 million project. And we do have what that would look like here. So now what this is going to do, the payments for these will come out of your operating budget. So you're already levying for those monies under revenue limit. So it's not going to create a new tax impact over and above, regardless of which project you do. And now when we looked at this, if you were to just issue new bonds for $1.2 million, you'd have probably $40-some thousand upfront cost. But we would combine this, we would time it, if everything worked out great, we would time it with the refunding bonds, and your upfront cost would be reduced by 85% versus bonding, on its own. So
And that's just because we have the energy efficiency bonds.
yes, because we're already issuing the bonds. So there's a certain amount of money that has to be spent on bond attorneys, rating agencies, financial advisors, paying agents. But to add to it at 1.2 million or 4.2 is not going to add a lot. So you can see on here your legal and fiscal costs, this might be closer to 40,000 if you issued these bonds alone, but if you time it up with the refunding bonds, it's only 5,400 additional. So this whole thing is predicated on timing it up. Otherwise, you're going to have to issue a little more bonds, probably around $30,000 to $40,000 higher. So if we go to the next page, this is what a 1.2 million, you'd actually issue about 1.21 million. Because you have to cover the $10,000 cost. It'd be about $140,000 a year over 10 years. And those were discussions Brent and I had as far as, that you could absorb that into your budget. So that would come out of your operating budget. It would actually run through debt service, but the revenue limit would shift that authority. So 20 year on a 4.225 is just over $300,000 a year. So that's what the financing would look like. If you wanted to issue these bonds, now these have to be bonds, not notes, because if we're going to combine them with refunding bonds, bonds have to be combined with bonds. You can't do notes. So the process would be adopting a resolution. I believe you do have resolutions tonight if you choose to act on them. Then you would hold a public hearing, publish a notice, and go through a petition period. So that would be the process of doing that. And then once you get a 30-day petition period, you would be free to issue them. We would time it up for refunding the NABs. Questions?
So when we met to discuss this and plan this meeting, we talked about payments for this borrowing coming out of our operating budget. I would argue, unless we have a lot of discipline, payments out of our operating budget could come out of our fund balance. This year, we're sitting at a deficit. We're going to spend more money than we're going to bring in. At least that's the budget we adopted. I want to understand from Brent and Ann, now that we know what it's going to be, $306,000 a year, or $140,000 a year, where within our budget we're going to carve out cost to afford this project. And then secondly, if we can afford $306,000 a year on $4.2 million in 20 years, why can't we afford $306,000 on $1.2 million and look at something less than 10 years? So Brent, I guess between you and Ann, give the board an idea where we're gonna cut.
How we derive it, obtaining the money to pay off the debt would be, I would reduce the deposit that I'm making into the trust fund, Fund 73. And basically, right now, you're putting $800,000 ish into that account, and then basically I would reduce the amount of the deposit down to reflect the difference in cost for whatever bonding proposal you put forth. And one of the things I said to Matt, you know, because he was concerned about spending the money, anytime we commit money to something, there's an opportunity cost. I mean, it's just like if you remodel your kitchen, you know, in your house, I mean, it costs you money, and there might not be something else you can do. But I mean, if you believe this is a good project, which I believe it is, you know, whichever way you guys decide to go, I mean, we can navigate the money. And part of the reason I love doing the financing on it is that it preserves opportunity. If you go spend your money that you have now and you took out $4 million, you got a cash flow borrow, you create bond issues, there's a lot of negatives. If we have a decline in enrollment, you know, and you lose 50 kids, now that's $500,000. Well, that makes things, I have to react a lot faster than I do if I've got a fund balance that's very workable. I mean, if something happens here, you know, you didn't see with your budget packet when we lost 35 kids, the business manager spazzing out going, oh God, we gotta cut something, we gotta cut something. That's the flexibility that you guys have and that many other schools, when you're reading about staff reductions and stuff, that's something I've been able to do thanks to the boards letting me do it over the last 29 years. You haven't had the indigestion that a lot of schools have with staff cuts. I mean, that is a fact.
You know, we've talked long and hard, Brent and I have, about would he and I bring this forward if we didn't believe we could make the payments? We wouldn't. We wouldn't be at the table bringing this forward if we felt that we could not make the payments, or if we felt that Donna was going to have 30 more kids in our class in order to make this payment. You know, we've spent many months taking a look at the different financing options, and it without a tax impact to our constituents, it's our best solution that we have. And we have a lot of issues, but remember, our fund balance is money we've already collected from our taxpayers that could and should be used to promote, you know, student learning. And what a more incredible way than to be able to have a science wing that we could be proud of. And more than that, just the domino effect that that has to tech ed, to English, to math, and to the other areas.
So are there any long-term effects of Fund 73 taking $6 million out of it over the next 20 years? I guess if there isn't, why are we putting all that money into it today when we could have been putting it into our facilities instead?
Well, the reason you're funding your OPEB account in Fund 73 is so that you don't have any concerns financially when it comes to your pension plan that you're giving for early retirement for your staff. Just look at Illinois. What's one of their biggest problems? They didn't fund their pension plan. Look at businesses. Look at the railroads. Look at automakers. All these companies didn't fund their pension plan.
So does that put our pension plan at risk?
No, gosh, no. I mean, right now you're sitting with $4 million in the account. At the end of this year, I think it's 4.7. Like I said, I think you're in a very sound footing, and we're still will be putting in more than what the pay-as-you-go is. If you look at what would be transpiring, that would be something that I'd say definitely I wouldn't put in my big worry. There's a lot of schools that have pension programs that have very little money in an account and are just paying, making go as they, or making do as they go. But I just don't think that, from an actuarial standpoint, I don't think that's a good idea to sit there and, you know, have 500,000 in, you're paying 500,000 out each year and going down to zero. It's just not fiscally responsible in my mind. That's not to say others don't have different opinions.
Brent, maybe related to the budget, another question here that indirectly maybe related. Recently, the state passed their budget. Is there any impacts, quite honestly, to our revenue intake in the next year or two based off of that budget plan?
Well, what the state is giving you basically is $200 per pupil, which basically amount to about $400,000 is what you get over the next 2 years per year.
Actually, it's 400 next year and it's 800 the following, right?
Well, let's put it this way, you're getting $400,000 more.
200
You're not getting 800,000.
Okay, so it's
If you add
per
every 2
year.
years, 400,000 to 400,000.
okay. And we have the
From last-
ability to appropriate that based off, quite honestly, our discretion, or there was some advisement, I think, by the state superintendent, Tony Evers, of what we have to appropriate those funds for. I don't know if that was a mandate, but.
There's nothing that says that I've ever seen, Kevin, that says, you know, when they gave you, you know, this year, when they give you the extra categorical aid of 400,000, that you have to spend it on X. I mean, they didn't say you had to hire $400,000 worth of English teachers or anything like that.
I think though they can provide a strategy on how it was justified. I think they can offer that, don't you?
Well, they probably could
Sure.
give a strategy.
And I think before our funding reform, number one. Number two is mental health needs. Number three is rural schools haves and have-nots. And number four is summer school initiatives. So that may or may not be a resource for us, quite honestly, to pay down on a reoccurring basis is what we're really hearing too.
Those sound like goals of Tony Evers. I mean, when you're talking about rural school initiatives. And by the way, we may appear to be rural, but according to the state, we're not rural, nor are we according to U.S. Census.
Okay, but we will have additional revenue intake from that.
Oh, definitely.
Oh,
Definitely. That's the $200 per pupil that you read about in the paper. And I think next year it's $204, I think it is. So, you know, that is good. But like I say, I think you really need to say we're in a good financial position, and I'd feel comfortable going forward with either plan, whichever you guys thought, but realize, you know, you're going to be putting forth money towards something. So, I mean, I can't physically do everything that we could in one of the referendums, obviously. I guess that's the one thing I said to Matt, is, you know, we can do a lot of good things through the budget, but I can't produce $35 million worth of projects.
so the next question that I had is that, okay, you know, we go and adopt the projects that we addressed in the CISA report. What does it look like after potentially option B is adopted? What is the time frame? What does that list look like, and what's the potential capital expenditures that are going to exist in front of us 2 years from now? That's a big question right now. I wish there would be a little bit more confidence in what that CapEx is going to look like.
That's a good conversation. Steve Kaiser and I, and as part of our team, Steve has been a part of all these meetings with us, and so that's one of the questions that we had. We do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. Steve, from your expertise and knowing our buildings inside and out, you and Dan, what are you seeing as some of our biggest issues that we have left? You know, what do we have left? I think one of the things that you talked about were some, clearly our infrastructure of our plumbing needs. But he felt, I mean, just talk about some of the, you felt that this ticked off a number of our issues.
Sure, you know, we have, as the buildings that have evolved over time, you know, in different additions, we have plumbing that runs lots of different ways. That has caused us problems in the past, there's no doubt about that, until we rectify that in some manner. But like to Ann's point, you know, the science rooms are a very costly area, no matter how you look at that. And you have to think about where those things sit right now. That is under all old cast iron, pits, and all that. That all connects to the mains. So those are going to be extremely costly for how you handle that. But when we look at, if you look at the new addition piece, you're going to put all that back into up to code products and reevaluate how all that sewage leaves that section of the building. Because right now, when that sewage leaves parts of the building, it goes across the parking lot to the pit, up to an injection through over the head, back over the 96, back down. I mean, there's all those things that were done for whatever reason they were done in the past. I can't speak to them, but that's where we sit.
I think Steve became that strongest advocate. He's the one who kept in our team saying to us,
just be aware that this is the condition that you have.
Plumbing is horrible.
Yeah.
Do an addition. So we have new plumbing, we have new pits, we have new stuff. And I really think from the responsibility of the problems that he has seen we're going to have come down the road, with all that plumbing in that area, that's a strong,
Well, it's just when you look at a project, especially a project of that scope, you know, there's a lot that goes entailed to that type of building or that type of classroom you're building. You know, it's not an art room, it's not an English room, it's a high density, high impact product that goes in there. There's all science, you know, acid piping, pits, all things that make those rooms function. They're a lot different than a normal space. But to the point as well, you know, you could look at our locker rooms too. All that piping, there's original tooling issues over there too. It is the core of what we have in our buildings. So, you know, we try to mitigate that as much as possible. Prime example was our kitchen last year. We opened the pipes up, there was no pipe stuck in the ground. I mean, what do you want me to do with that? I can dig it out and reconnect that, but they're rotted away. You run a snake through and you go right to the ground. Sorry, I have no pipe left. So, you know, those conditions have, because actually when pipes are put in the ground, are supposed to be pitched, they collapse over time, they lay low. You know, I can't see below the concrete. I wish I could tell you I can, but I can't. So I know I have time bombs ticking in lots of different areas. Some are going to be higher use than others. So, you know, I just want to make from a standpoint of looking at a project, you know, we got to be really careful how we address how we're going to handle that plumbing aspect of this project. It's a very high intensity plumbing project. And just to make sure we're clear about where we're going to go with that, what we tie into. Because once you tie into an old pipe, remember you tie into an old pipe. And that's one of the questions that I can't answer that for you until the design will be done, but it's just one of the issues that we do have. So.
Steve, can you just share a little bit about your passion, the guaranteed? You know, what did Myron's, Steve Kaiser, what did Myron's guarantee? So when you go out and you ask somebody for a bid, you know, I wasn't sure really what this meant, but the 4.2 was a guarantee by Myron, meaning that what was drawn up and what was done was a guarantee. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to go with them. You still bid that out. You know what I mean? To gain efficiencies, Brent would chop at the bit to be able to bid that out and get a better price on it. But we do know that that 4.2 was a guarantee. So based on Steve's architectural drawings and his plannings, they gave us a guarantee on that.
Well, I'm going to offer this to my opinion here. I really feel that we should take a long, hard look at this and not make it an emotional decision. Right now, I think there's a lot of good information that's presented to us. I think that we need to look past, quite honestly, 6 months out and what we just talked about, pipes in the ground here and pipes in the ground there. That stuff's going to have to be addressed too, and it's going to be behind this initiative. I think that, quite honestly, I'd like to personally think about this. So I'm gonna throw this out there. I'd like to table this for a month and bring this back next month. This is the first time I've seen all this information and had an opportunity to listen to all the people that engage in it. So I personally would like to wait on this a little bit and make a decision in a month.
The only thing I had.
So just, that was a motion?
Yes.
That was, so motion by Theo, second by Kiewist to table. Further discussion?
Well, and my only concern, just adding to yours, is